Have you ever noticed how the voices of the Simpsons characters have changed over time? You might think you know the show well, but there's more to their voices than you know. This video takes a quick look at how the voice acting has evolved from the first episode, so join us as we explain the Simpsons voice acting evolution in detail. It all began with a few rough lines shouted into cheap microphones on the Tracy Ullman Show in 1987. Nobody, not even the actors, knew that these short cartoon clips would grow into one of the biggest shows in TV history. Back then, the voices weren't just unpolished, they sounded like they were echoing from inside a metal box. Dan Castellaneta, who voiced Homer, was trying to copy the actor Walter Matthau. So Homer sounded slow, low, and grouchy, more like a tired grandfather than a confused dad. Instead of being funny, he came off as stiff and out of place, like he belonged in another show. Julie Kavner Marge didn't feel like a loving wife yet either. Her voice was soft and flat, almost like she had a cold and didn't want to make too much noise. The famous scratchy whisper she later became known for wasn't there. She spoke in a calm, even tone that didn't carry much feeling. It sounded more like someone carefully reading instructions than acting. Nancy Cartwright, who voiced Bart, made a strong choice from the beginning. You could hear that Bart had a wild streak in him, but early, Bart also sounded rough, like a kid who had been in trouble more than once. He didn't sound young and playful. He sounded like he had seen things. Lisa, played by Yeardley Smith, had a clear and smooth voice from the start, but her early lines lacked emotion. She sounded smart, but not alive, more like she was reading a book report out loud. In those early shorts, everyone seemed unsure. The timing was loose, the jokes didn't always land, and the whole thing felt more like a school play than a real show. Part of the problem was how it was made. The actors had little direction, bad microphones, and sometimes had to yell just to be heard, not because the lines needed it. It was all trial and error. But in 1989, everything changed. In Season 1, things began to take shape, but slowly. The voices were still stiff, like actors learning to walk in new shoes. Homer was somewhere between Grumpy Dad and the silly character he would later become. His voice stayed low and often sounded annoyed, even when he was supposed to be happy. Marge's voice stayed steady, but not yet deep or emotional. Kavner would stretch certain words like she was still figuring Marge out. Still, she began to add small pauses that hinted at who the character could become. Bart, on the other hand, got stronger fast. Cartwright's voice became sharper and more fun. It matched the wild attitude of the show. Bart's words started to jump off the screen with a cocky charm. Lisa began to develop too. Smith added more breathing room into her delivery, which made Lisa sound like she was thinking, not just talking. That's when Lisa began to feel real. Other characters were still unclear. Moe sounded like a tough guy from an old movie. Mr. Burns didn't have his famous creepy voice yet. He sounded plain and forgettable. Flanders was just a regular neighbor. Castellaneta was doing many of these voices, and sometimes they all sounded too similar. It was like hearing one man talk to himself in different moods. At this point, the show still didn't have a strong vocal identity, but episode by episode, things improved. The writing got sharper, the jokes hit harder, and the voices started to feel right. Then came a special time, seasons 2 to 4. This was when the voices really came to life. Homer changed the most. Castellaneta's raised the pitch and added more bounce. The rough sound gave way to a sillier, more flexible voice. Homer could now cry, laugh, squeal, and shout in just one scene. He began to sound like someone whose brain worked on its own strange rhythm. Marge's voice also grew. Kavner added emotion, heavier sighs, stronger groans, and a kind of tired love in her tone. You could hear her carrying the stress of being the only sane person in the house. Bart's voice became sharper and faster. Cartwright nailed the rhythm of his jokes and gave his voice little cracks and squeaks when he was surprised or angry. You could almost see the smirk on his face through the sound alone. Lisa matured during this time. Smith made her voice cleaner, more thoughtful. Lisa could now sound both innocent and smart, sometimes in the same line. Her voice carried ideas, worries, and quiet sarcasm without ever sounding fake. She was no longer a kid trying to sound clever. She became a full character with real feelings and opinions. Other characters got their own unique sounds, too. Moe found his growl loud, nasal, and full of sadness. Mr. Burns became soft and spooky like a ghost. Harry Shearer gave him long, slow words that made him sound rich, old, and dangerous. Smithers changed too. His voice dropped a rough tone and became higher, more eager, like someone always trying to please. Flanders became cheerful and chirpy. His voice turned sweet, but also slightly annoying, which fit the character perfectly. This was also the time when voice actors started separating their roles clearly. Even though some actors voiced many characters, you could now tell them apart. Each voice had its own style, speed, and personality. By the time season 5 through 8 arrived, the cast had hit their stride. This was the golden age, not just for stories, but for voice work. Homer became wild and unpredictable. Castellaneta took more risks. He added loud screams, strange groans, and even quiet whispers that still felt loud. Homer's voice could switch from silly to serious in seconds. He was more than just funny. He felt full of life, even in a cartoon body. Marge's voice got stronger. Kavner filled it with worry, sarcasm, and love, all in one sentence. Her simple word, Homer, could carry deep meaning, sometimes gentle, sometimes full of frustration. She didn't just speak, she acted with her voice. Bart stayed loud and playful, but Cartwright gave him a softer side. When Bart was scared, his voice shook. When he was planning something sneaky, it got sharper and faster. Lisa became the show's voice of reason. Smith used a soft tone for sad moments and a firmer tone for serious ones. When Lisa was upset, you believed it. When she made a smart joke, it hit hard. Mr. Burns turned into something ghostly. Shearer made him sound half dead with slow whispery speech that dragged out every word. Moe became even rougher, like someone who never left the bar. Characters like Chief Wiggum, Krusty, and Principal Skinner got their full voices too. Wiggum slurred like a lazy cop. Krusty laughed with a raspy wheeze. And Skinner spoke like a strict teacher holding back anger. Shearer and Hank Azaria filled these voices with strange, funny quirks that made them instantly memorable. By now, even guest stars tried to match the energy of the main cast. With all this progress, the first major era of voice evolution came to a close. The characters were no longer in development, they were fully formed. Even at its best, nothing lasts forever. After a while, doing the same thing over and over starts to wear things down. From seasons 9 to 12, the voices on The Simpsons didn't fall apart. But they did begin to change in small, sometimes worrying ways. Homer's voice got louder, not in an emotional way, just in volume. It was almost like Dan Castellaneta was turning up the energy to make up for the smaller details he used to include. The high-pitched yelling stayed, but the quiet moments started to disappear. Homer began to sound less like a man reacting to the world and more like someone constantly shouting at it, even when the joke didn't really need it. Marge's voice also changed, but not for the better. Julie Kavner had always used that deep, raspy voice that made Marge stand out. But now that rasp was doing a lot more work. When she had to give long speeches, it started to sound tiring. The warmth in her voice was still there, but you could hear how much effort it took to get through the lines. She wasn't being lazy. She was still trying, but sometimes it sounded like she needed to clear her throat in the middle of a sentence. Bart's voice stayed pretty much the same. Nancy Cartwright had really figured out how to play him, so even when the writing got weaker or the jokes got louder, Bart's voice still felt solid. But even that had a catch. The fun, boyish energy that used to feel fresh now felt a little practiced. His jokes still landed, but they came with a familiar rhythm, like a song you've heard too many times. The energy was there, but the surprise was fading. Lisa, on the other hand, started to sound more like a machine. Yeardley Smith was still doing a good job, but the way Lisa talked lost some of its wonder. Instead of sounding curious, she started sounding like she was giving a lesson. The pauses got shorter. The lines felt more prepared. She still had emotional moments, but they didn't feel as natural. Lisa was now the smart one in the room, but that made her voice a bit stiff. The openness of her character was closing off. The side characters were changing too. Mr. Burns, who used to sound creepy in a quiet and unsettling way, was now moving toward being a joke. His voice got higher, more squeaky and less scary. He used to sound like something from a haunted house. Now he sounded more like an annoyed puppet. Chief Wiggum and Ralph followed a similar path. Their voices, which used to be funny because they felt real and clueless, were now over the top. Hank Azaria still hit the right timing, but the voices felt more exaggerated, less like people, more like cartoons. And maybe that was the bigger change. The voices were starting to match the writing. The show was becoming sillier, and the voices followed. All the small touches, the sighs, the pauses, the quiet moments were harder to find. Instead, the voice work started to match the fast, loud jokes. The sound of The Simpsons was changing, not falling apart, just adjusting. Some fans didn't like it, but you could still tell the actors were trying, even if everything around them was changing. By season 13 to 18, the voices were settled into their new forms. At this point, they weren't changing much. The goal now was just to keep things steady. Homer's voice had become rounder and louder. Castellaneta had polished every scream and yell, but the quiet side of Homer, the version who used the softer whisper, though, when he was embarrassed, was mostly gone. Homer was now a full cartoon character, and his voice showed it. Everything was big and bold. The little moments had disappeared. Marge's rasp got even stronger. Kavner was still putting in the work. But now every line seemed to take effort. She could still bring emotion, but you could hear the strain. Her long speeches felt heavier. That soft, comforting tone she once had was now rougher, sometimes scratchy, sometimes short of breath. She was still Marge, but her voice had aged, even if her face on screen hadn't. Bart and Lisa stayed surprisingly steady during these years. Cartwright's Bart still had energy, but some lines felt like they were on repeat. She had nailed the voice and it didn't change. But that also meant it didn't surprise anyone anymore. Lisa's voice became more planned out. Yeardley Smith was still clear and sharp, but it kind of felt more like she was hitting marks than exploring the role. She still had feeling and timing, but some of the fun had faded. The side characters went even further into exaggeration. Apu, Lenny, and Carl started to sound more like routines than actual people. Azaria still had great range, but it felt like he was working from memory. Mr. Burns, once scary and strange, now sounded more like a cartoon ghost. He could still say funny things, but he wasn't threatening anymore. He sounded old, but not scary. Meanwhile, newer characters were heading in the opposite direction. Characters like Crazy Cat Lady, Duffman, and Gil were built around big, loud voices. Screaming, coughing, and moaning became a joke. This showed how the show's sound was changing. Loud voices got laughs, quiet moments were rare, but now the main cast could slip into their roles easily. But that comfort also brought repetition. The voices were still famous, still strong, but now they were predictable. The way lines were delivered felt like muscle memory than fresh emotion. The heart was still there, but it had to fight with routine. What other changes have you noticed in the voices of the Simpsons characters? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching and supporting our channel. Click the next video on your screen to dive into another exciting Simpsons story.